It wasn't me. I won't. Sorry, I'm not. Thank you very much for coming to this afternoon plenary session. And we're going to be talking about what's going on, developments in addressing migrant homelessness. My name is Maria Iglesias. I'm the head of operations at Praxis. I've been there for like 6 years now, and before that, I was for a long time in St. Mungo's, working in a variety of roles. So we're going to be talking about what's going on at the moment. There is lots of things going on, and we have got fantastic speakers that I will be introducing in a minute. But I think first I would like to open this session having a little reflection about there is really good stuff happening today, and I think that was sort of brought up in the meeting in the sort of like the plenary this morning and in the discussions this morning. We're still working in a quite sort of difficult home office policy context. We still have the hostile environment, and we have a terrible narrative against migrants, but there has been, some sort of progress operationally speaking, let's say. And I think that, it hasn't been easy to get where we are now. So I just 5 years ago, like Praxis, for example, we started this tiny project called Street Liga with St. Mungo's Refugee Action. At that point was like 2 immigration advisors, and it was funded by the big lottery, and it was incredibly challenging because we thought that the solution meant different things. And because I think fundamentally we thought we have a different idea of what a rights-based approach was. Also at that point, we had very little interaction with the Department of Leveling Up. No, that was at that point it was MH. Well, it took me a long time to learn this, but the previous one before they were leveling up. And absolutely, we had no hardly any interaction with the Home Office, and I think that fundamentally led to like things like the rapid sleeper support service not sort of being, don't know if I'm allowed to say that was a bit of a flop at that point. And because there was just no engagement about what it was meant to do, and there was no and because there was no discussion whatsoever with the migrant sector. And when there was like a discussion, it was too late. So it's really great that today we're here, that we are presenting a sub-regional service, that immigration advice sub-regional service for rapid sleepers, which is the largest ever that we had in the UK. We had 20 immigration advisors now. It's great that we have got fantastic representation from the Home Office today. I'm really pleased that we have got colleagues from the Home Office here. I'm very pleased that, we have Claire and, everybody, and Stephen. And also, I'm very happy of the support that from Dulug. And I think that's been great. It's been great also that we have got Lydia, obviously, and it's also great to have London councils. So I think that for me, from what we were like 5 years ago to where we are now, it's been a joy really to see where we are and how much we have advanced. And just give me these 5 minutes of joy. I know that it's been a long journey, and it's been hard in many ways, and everybody that has been part of this journey is aware of that. I think that is also important to acknowledge colleagues from other organizations to help to shape what was legal and not, in sort of working with rapid sleepers, like the Public Interest Law Center. And I think that, we are here, and that's great. And I think that, and I'm delighted to have this panel, which has been instrumental in this change. So So yeah, I'm not going to talk more because there's a lot of people here, and I want you to have the opportunity to ask questions at the end. But we're gonna first sort of hear from John Carrot, who is gonna apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name properly.
That's fine. It's all good.
Who is going to be telling us. John has got a lot of experience on how communities and faith groups work alongside local governments, and he's going to be telling us about lessons learned from RSI funding. And then I will introduce the other speakers as we go along, if that's okay. So, John, over to you.
Thank you. Is that all right? Yeah, we got coming through. Thank you. That's great. Thanks, Maria. It's really good to be here. And I think that, as Maria said, this is a really, really challenging issue, but it's so important that we're in the room together talking about it robustly, honestly. I think that's so much better than sort of being stuck in sort of echo chambers. Perhaps we're just full of people who think the same things, or perhaps arguing on social media. And I've been seconded into DLUC. I've always worked for homeless charities. So 22 years ago, I was managing the hostel just a stone's throw on Ensley Gardens, which is owned by St Mungo's. Whenever I come here, I always remember my one hilarious staff member was used to phone me up on call, and he always used to say, "Euston, we have a problem." He thought it was funny. Sort of walked in after a while. But I've always worked, for charities, and up until was being seconded to DLUC, I was working for the West London Mission. And we had a day centre. It wasn't, it had a small amount of funding from the local authority, but it was mostly non-commissioned. And, during the course of my years at West London Mission, I was there for 8 years, the percentage of non-UK nationals just went up year after year. I mean, at some point, it was around sort of 60–70% of the users of that day centre in Marylebone were non-UK nationals. And the night shelter that we set up in partnership with the churches and the mosque and the synagogue in Westminster often had more like 90–95% non-UK nationals. And I think that being seconded I think the things I'm going to say here, even though I'm working for government now, are pretty much the same things I would have said when I was working for the West London Mission, a non-commissioned service. I've put this picture up here because this is my local park. I actually walked past this encampment this morning on my way to the station. And I think that talking about a sort of very local situation is quite helpful, especially when we're talking about systems change, we're talking about policy. I've got a localized example here where we've got a real, this issue that we're here to talk about is really manifested in my local park. There's 4 or 5 guys, all males, they're all Polish, who are sleeping in the park. They've been there for the last few months. And if you just put the next slide up, there's basically a lot of problems that are being caused here. Obviously, most of all, there are people who are vulnerable and who are really struggling. But also, the situation that they're staying in is just getting worse and worse. They're defecating in the park. There's a whole load of litter. There's a whole load of rubbish, and their situation is going downhill. And I know them all because I'm a volunteer in my local church. We run a meal tonight. I imagine all of them will come to the meal that we run tonight. And I've got to know them. I've been talking to them. I've also been involved in more of the sort of strategic meetings with the local authority about what they're doing. But for me, it's like a microcosm of this issue because there is an offer for these guys. There is accommodation that they could take up. The outreach teams are seeking to connect with them as well as possible. They're in a situation where they're working intermittently. They're pretty much drinking, I think, all they're earning, as far as I can see. And they're really, really stuck. And the community that we actually is so important in responding to homelessness, that people have a community, is actually part of a negative factor because they really aren't either willing or able to really, really connect with the services that are there. And I think, earlier today we were talking about racism and the issues there. And I think this is an important sort of side of this issue, that I live in a deeply multicultural area. This park is surrounded by, BMX track, cricket pitch, loads of different stuff, football pitches used by all the sort of, all of the multicultural variants you get in London. And yet some of the xenophobic comments that are emerging is because of this situation, because things aren't being dealt with. I feel unless this is dealt with adequately and humanitarianly, but robustly, actually it is a breeding ground for xenophobia and racism. And I just want to show a little model that I use in my work quite a lot. Between, in a sense, you've got two axes. You've got one of kindness and support there. And then along the bottom, one of challenge and truthfulness. And if you're sort of low in both of these, if you put the next one up, in fact, you can put all the boxes up. That's great. And if you're low in both, you're not really helping much. A service that is neither kind, supportive, or challenging or truthful isn't probably helping much at all. But there can also be a problem, where it's all about kindness and support. And actually, that is a kind of space which is often quite naive in terms of its ability to create change. And at DLUC, I specifically work with a lot of faith and community groups. And I use this to try and encourage them that as well as the food and the support and the resources, or the tents or the sleeping bags or the money, often these things aren't actually leading to long-term change. The church-based night shelter movement that grew up in the last 20 years actually, brought in a huge number of non-UK nationals. But it was strong in its welcome and its acceptance, but often didn't have the resources to really get the issues that were underneath these problems. So it could maintain people, but actually struggle to really unpick the issues. Now, of course, at the other end of the spectrum, that red box, if it's all about challenge and just a harsh truthfulness, then you lead to some of the excesses that we've seen in the past in terms of removals and things that look back on as not a humanitarian response. But I kind of really believe in this blend of these two things. And all my experience, whether I've got a charitable hat on, whether I'm working for the government, or I'm volunteering tonight in my church-based, meal that we offer, I believe that transformation comes from a fusion of these things. And that's what's good about this event today. How do these things blend in ways that really work rather than getting polarized? And there's no policy area that's been more polarized than migration. And I think often that polarization has not served the people well that we most care about. It led to sort of posturing and a lot of debates, but actually how much real change. So, we talked about truth to power. Truth to power is a great thing to say in sort of, conferences like this. I think one of the things I'm more interested in is the truth that needs to be spoken to people who are powerless, who are really struggling. Because I think the truthfulness about their situation, even about their identity, that is a key part of getting their settled status and their immigration situation sorted out, is one of the biggest challenges. I was challenged by a friend who I met at an event a while ago who works in Poland. And she said lots of interesting things, but she said, I think the sort of liberal left charitable sector in Britain has got to be really careful about romanticizing a lot of people's situations, because people leave behind an awful lot of abandoned families, no childcare payments made, crimes, all kinds of issues. Now, she wasn't really being super judgmental or anything. She was just offering a bit of a balance. It's not often a perspective we hear very often. So I think, avoiding polarization, grappling with these tensions is really, really key. And I've just got sort of 8 points that I want to share from the Rough Sleeping Initiative. I spoke to my colleagues, but most of us advisors being seconded in either from local authorities or from charities. And these are kind of 8 points I want to make. I'm really happy, obviously, to be challenged and disagreed with. That's absolutely, that's what I'm here for. And the first thing is this term. We've heard a lot of this term this morning, restricted eligibility, rather than a blanket use of NRPF. And I mean, I heard this first from Jean Damas, the immigration activist who was outlining his belief in that phrase. And I think it was really helpful to hear that, because I think the term NRPF, whilst it was the problem that people didn't have access to public funds has also really been challenged by the situation during the pandemic and the Everyone In initiative, where it actually turned out that with the steps, a load of people did have access to public funds. And that's been one of the key things. And I think it gives a sense of purpose and more realism, which has been really useful. And it's especially important in terms of accessing public funds, because of course it's hard for the government to give funds to projects that are saying they want to work with people who have no recourse to public funds. Whereas restricted eligibility has opened up a really good space. I think secondly, a sort of time-limited accommodation offer has been really important. I know that's very obvious and it was said earlier, but I think the need to provide focus has been really important in places where this has worked well, not just an open-ended situation, but a focused time period in order to get immigration situations sorted out, real kind of energy and drive around a time-limited offer. I think thirdly, the strong partnerships with the voluntary and community sector have been really critical. You know, we've been, especially in the establishment of my role, you know, my role is specifically to do with non-commissioned services. We've also commissioned Housing Justice to work with a lot of the church-based night shelters. And I think these partnerships, I think Michelle Binfield said this earlier, that, you know, pandemic's been terrible, but it has been good for partnerships. And actually this coming together, and especially this combination of trust and resources, because a lot of the time, the people who've got the resources haven't got the trust of the people we're talking about. And often the people who've got the trust haven't got the resources. And so it's the fusion of those things that I think has been really, really critical. Fourthly, it's really obvious to say, so I won't dwell on it, but integrated immigration advice, the investment in that is obviously absolutely critical. You know, there are things that need sorting out with expert advice that can't be sorted out with just practical resources being given out. I've been really struck, fifthly, by the importance of obviously translation, but also native speakers. There's been a brilliant group in Northampton called International Lighthouse, and they're a rights-based agency established to help migrants avoid exploitation. And they can access speakers of all of the languages of the people sleeping rough in Northampton. And I've seen them go from this kind of group of 30 people, they were termed entrenched and difficult and no one knew what to do. This International Lighthouse group have been commissioned to work with those people, and it's really whittled it down. And talking to them is so refreshing, because they just saying about the struggles to really, really get trust with people so that people can actually share with them their real identity. And instead of having 3 or 4 identities that are sort of circling around, actually nail what the situation is, uncover that truthfulness to actually make progress with their situation. Sixthly, engagement with the Home Office. I think Maria, you referred to some of the things that weren't working, and I think the escalation, the acceleration scheme that we'll hear more about has been really, really important to build that trust and actually see to get that break that impasse really between not sharing with the Home Office, you know, information has enabled, I think, some real key breakthroughs to be made. And if you just put the last 2 up, the last one, you know, I'll say about training. I think actually staff being equipped in knowing about the different elements of settled status and pre-settled status and all of these things has obviously been really key, been vital. But just the last one, the 7th I wanted to say there was a proactive, can-do and joined-up approach. I think the local authorities that we've seen really make great strides in this situation have been the ones that have applied real energy, real humanity, but also have been very pragmatic, you know, to actually, you know, engage with the Home Office, to engage with faith and community groups. That's quite a bridge to build sometimes. But those ones who've done that, I think, have seen real breakthroughs. And it's been fantastic to see that kind of combination, as I said earlier, of the kindness and the humanitarian and the compassion allied to real realism and truthfulness and a challenge to people to, you know, make the most of their situations and get out of the nightmare of rough sleeping. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, John. Thanks a lot. Oh, sorry, you don't need to give me this. I've got my microphone thingy. Lydia is the one that needs it. So the next speaker is Lydia Estevez Picon, who is the rapid sleeping So who is the rapid sleeping migration manager at the GLA. At the GLA, she oversees and advises on operation and policy matters regarding to the intersection between rapid sleeping and migration. But most importantly, Lydia, well, most importantly, importantly, also she leads the HMAP, the Homeless Migrant Advisory Panel, which I think has been instrumental in bringing the migrant center and the homelessness sector and home office and the look together. So I think that's a fantastic example of how things can work. And I'm very happy that she's here. So over to you, Lydia. Oh, you got it.
Got this one. Is it working? Yes. You can all hear me. Great. So there's some slides that are coming up. I'm going to be talking mainly about specific services. So apologies that I might not give any kind of deep reflection about all that we're talking about, but I can try later if there's time. But basically, I was asked to focus on the sub-regional immigration advice services that we've heard already a couple of times, but just to dig more into what exactly that is and what it will offer. So if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about 4 things related to the sub-regional immigration advice services. So a bit of very briefly background, then that I think, again, some of the discussions we've had so far, I'm sure you're aware of that background, and then what they offer is in terms of immigration advice, the link worker service as well, and the accommodation part of the service. And then I'll just quickly mention, if there is time, other support specifically for migrants who are homeless, which are funded mainly by the GLA. So if we start in terms of the background of the sub-regional immigration advice services. So we've heard this before. So during everyone in, one thing that was quite groundbreaking and just a great opportunity that we saw that having NRPF doesn't mean having no options. Like actually people can move on from the streets, and it's about getting them the right advice and the right support. I think that's the biggest lesson in this area that was kind of learned, and like local authorities, government, homelessness charities, everyone kind of got more of an understanding and seeing cases where actually the person, it seemed like, oh, we had all of these people coming into services that didn't have any options, but actually once you provided that, so many people moved on positively, which is great to see once you have those real examples. And one key part of that was immigration advice. The other key part was specialist support. So not just immigration advice, not just the legal support, but also that specialist support about what are those options. So things like asylum support, accommodation, hosting, what are people entitled to while they're waiting for an immigration case to be resolved, etc., etc. Speak more on the background. You come back. So at the time, before this new service, what was available was some local authorities were funding immigration advice, but in some cases it was a little bit like a postcode lottery where depending on where you were, you would get better immigration advice or you would really struggle to find anyone to support you. We had the mayor's immigration advice for RAF Seepers Fund for a bit, for around 15 months or so. So that also proved like different models where that can work. We obviously had legal aid for a while, but as you know, since 2013 or so, that's just become very restricted for what people can access from most of the cases in this group. And then we had some piecemeal provision of free access from other types of funding of immigration advice. So it was very much something that you would hear all the time was it's really hard to get anyone to do an immigration case. Maybe they'll do some assessment, but then there is no capacity for casework. So that was a big issue. And in July this year, we were successful and the RSI, together with London councils, we made a bid. We talked to all of, obviously, local authorities, charities, etc. And we now have this new sub-regional immigration advice services. I'm going to be talking about 4 of them that are specifically part of that project, but there is also one in North London that the funding was obtained by North London Housing Partnership, but the whole of London is covered, but I'll just focus on those 4 ones that London councils and the GLA is involved in directly. So we can move on to the immigration advice. So, okay, so we have 4 services before that. We have 4 services, 4 sub-regional services, but within each of those services, there's more than one organization. So again, we recognize that one of the issues as well that we've heard of is that there's not a lot of immigration advisors available. And it was important not to just like make immigration advisors go from one organization to the other. There was capacity in those organizations. And we've been really lucky that we were able to set up these services in the organizations that were already doing some of that work, but expanding the capacity or concentrating the capacity to support this group. And in each of these services, we have at least one legal aid provider. So we also have this element that I'm sure a lot of you have heard, which is like the delays in getting someone to take a case on the legal aid. There is arrangements in place, so that shouldn't cause delay in most cases. And the capacity is both for assessments and also for casework, including complex casework. So we think that that is hopefully meeting the demand, or at least part of the demand. I'm sure we'll find out more, because once we look into this, maybe, you know, there will be more demand that we were even aware of. But this should make a big difference. As Maria said, it's like the biggest service of this kind that we've had so far. So it's a huge improvement. And then we have the link worker service. So this is addressing that second element that I mentioned before, which is the specialist support. So the link worker service, we have four link workers, 4 immigration link workers covering the 4 sub-regions. These services at the moment only running until September 2023, because the idea is that they will help kind of build the capacity of the homelessness charities that will be referring to immigration advice. And so part of what they will do is help those charities to identify people, because that has been an issue in the past around identifying who actually needs that advice, but also support those services to see what are the options of the streets. It is not easy. I was doing that kind of job before, and you realize the more you do the work that there is actually a lot more that you think there is at the beginning. You learn about little tricks like HC2 and, you know, freedom passes and like all of these things that seem obvious, but until someone tells you that this is a possibility, you just wouldn't do it. So we think this service will have a very important role to make sure that the whole thing works and we actually move people off the streets. Or prevent people. Then I just have a little map that we all have in our folders. So you should have seen that, hopefully. So that's just for you to see in a visual way how that's covered and how the referrals work, and then the link, how to contact the link worker service. So again, you should have that in your packs, so you can act on it very easily. There is also a very exciting part of the service that's less well known, which is a pot of funding for accommodation. So because of what we've been discussing until now, there is an awareness that when people are on the streets, it's really difficult for them to kind of liaise on the immigration advice and help to collect documents, everything. Basically, it just shouldn't be like that. People shouldn't be having to be on the streets while they're working on these. So there is a small pot of funding for them to be able, especially focusing on the most vulnerable, for them to be able to be accommodated while they're working with the immigration advisor. And referrals come mainly from advisors, outreach teams, and local authorities. And just a call out that we are, so it's the link workers who's leading on that together with London councils and us, and we are looking for options to spot purchase, specifically in services where there is supported accommodation, because a lot of the people have needs and things like hotels or B&Bs might not be appropriate. So that's something that we're very open to have conversations on. So that is it on the sub-regional services. If I have a bit more time, I'll quickly touch on the other services. Is that okay?
Yes, okay, that's fine.
So yeah, just to say, in terms of other services to be aware of, we have the Roma support group, the Roma RAF-CPIN team, which you have heard of already. We have a training program on supporting non-UK nationals. So that's run by Homeless Link and Praxis. And that's available for everyone kind of working in this area. So please have a look, and maybe this can be shared as well after the meeting. We also have a specific service. It's kind of like a pilot working with people who are unclear immigration status, and because of their vulnerability, they can't engage well on the street. So it's like an accommodation project to have them accommodated, supported, and then look into the immigration options. We also have the Roots Home service that I know we have people from the Roots Home service here, and they've been doing amazing work, both kind of supporting services to understand what the options are for the clients, supporting clients to get immigration advice, etc. And also in the cases where people want to reconnect to the country of origin, doing very complex supported reconnections in those cases. Then something that, again, not everyone knows, I think most people know about NSNO. When people come through an NSNO, they all should get immigration advice if they have an immigration need and it's not clear what their entitlements are. And there is some accommodation available as well for both those that are more vulnerable to be supported through what they need. And just to end on the work that Maria, you mentioned on HMAP and on just working with government. So both the Home Office who have been really open, and we have a lot of discussions. A lot of you are very aware of like the detail of it, but some of you might not be as aware. But we've been talking about like specific policies and how they affect rough sleepers and how to find solutions, etc., that can support this group in a better way. I just wanted to end with something that you made me think of this sentence that I heard somewhere. Sorry, not a very good reference, but in this area specifically, simplicity is our enemy, and we have to embrace complexity because it is complex. I've been told of a lot in meetings because I talk a lot of the technical stuff, but sorry, I can't do it in like a simple way because it's not simple. It is a complex area. Not everyone is the same. And we can only resolve this if we really look into each individual case and have like an array of options to support people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Livia. I quite like that one. So when I said that sort of leads us nicely to our, a good thing that works, right? Yeah. It's just too many things to coordinate. So our next speaker is Jill Taylor, who is the Assistant Director for Community and Housing Support at London Borough of Haringey. Jill has 20 years experience in the homeless sector. And I got, this is like a mouthful, but I really like it. As I spent the last 5 years working on best practice approaches to safeguarding that center lived experience, anti-oppressive practice, and trauma-informed systems change.
It's a big sentence.
It is. Jill has also, I haven't finished. Jill has also, like introducing you, she's also done fantastic work with NACOM and the homeless link, has participated in the project. And I think that, and it's she's going to be telling us about how local authorities can help. And I think this morning we talk about existing options. And I think that is a very good example of all the things that can be done by local authorities. So over to you now.
Thank you. Can people hear me? I'm afraid that I might start with a bit of a black cloud compared to my colleagues. When Maria first invited me to talk today, I was really excited. So I thought, oh, great. Most people that have ever heard me speak at a conference have only ever heard me speaking about death, which is something that I've been working on a lot over the last few years. And I thought, oh, this is such a great opportunity to talk about something good, something that we've done loads of work on, I feel really proud of. And that was all very exciting. And then this morning, one of the people who's living in one of our hotels died. And that person is an Eastern European man who's the same age as me. I'm 38, reference. And I thought, actually, it's all the same. And we keep having the same conversations. And it's depressing to come and talk about something really positively when actually it's not always very positive. So I'm saying that not because I don't have good things to say or because I think we shouldn't talk about them, because I think when we talk about truth and realism, it's grounded in that reality. And telling people what their options are and exhausting all of them is something that we all have to do. But we shouldn't have to. And I think for me, although everything I'm about to say is all of the ways in which we've navigated a system and made things work, actually, that shouldn't have to happen. And I think for me, there's something in not wanting to say this is all okay and we can just find our ways around it. It's not okay, but we do have to find our ways around it. And that's, I guess, the baseline for what I want to say now. Many of you may have had never been to Haringey before, but I hope you have. It's God's own borough, in my opinion. We, a few years ago, made a really strong decision around our relationship to Home Office enforcement. The consent that we would expect from people before we spoke to those teams. Our political cabinet members in the borough made a press release, and it went all over the place, and lots of people got in touch with me. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Why are you not going to work with the Home Office? What are you going to do? And at first I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get arrested. This is awful. I don't know if we're allowed to do this. I don't know if that cabinet member can say that. Is it okay? And then with the challenge of people like Streets Kitchen, like Public Interest Law Company and others who said, yes, you can. These are the ways you can. These are the ways you can do it. We started to think about, okay, well, what are we actually going to do? What are the things that we can make happen within the framework of the law that we have in front of us? And in some ways that felt really radical at the time, but then everybody in happened and then we all just did it. So in some ways the answers are quite simple. You just offer people somewhere to stay and make sure they've got enough food, and then you can start talking about the hard work of immigration, because it just can't happen on the streets. But it's not theoretically anymore of the pandemic. So the things I'm going to talk about are some of the things that we did, in the hope that if you're working for a council, which I don't think many of you actually are, but if you're working with people in the council, you can encourage them to do. The first thing that we did was get political support. And I don't mean big P politics like my colleagues on the panel here. I mean your local councillors, the people that are working in the boroughs, because it's with their support that councils make decisions. So if they support working with migrant populations, supporting people with no recourse to public funds, they will give that mandate to the council that you're working with to be able to do that. So speak to them. They have surgeries, they work everywhere. You can find out who your cabinet members are online, talk to them and find out what they're interested in. It makes a big difference. The next thing you do is the things that you're doing all the time, which actually councils are often not very good at, and it's being friendly, it's acting in solidarity, it's being welcoming, it's creating spaces that people can come to, so that when they actually need help, they believe that you might help them, which to you might seem really obvious, but if you've ever been to housing options, which I'm sure many of you have with your colleagues, it's not so nice when you walk through those doors. So for us, it's something about how do you change that? And I don't think we've cracked it by any means, but it's definitely how do you create spaces where people feel like you're working with them and not against them? That also includes, and this is where a point where John and I agree, working with organizations that can do things that you can't. Faith-based night shelters, etc., can provide accommodation when councils can't do it, or when charities can't do it, or where restrictions mean that it's not possible. They also often have the relationships you can't have. Lots of my colleagues in other councils find that relationship quite difficult, and we definitely also did. Some of those faith-based shelters didn't want to talk to us because they said, well, 5 years ago you took our building from us and now we've got to be in this place and that's your fault. So it took a long time to acknowledge that and be accountable, but then also have a relationship which was based on what can we each do that the other can't, and how do we try to work together to do that. And I'm really grateful that the organisations working in our boroughs that we don't commission and that we don't fund in any way want to work with us now and want to at least have conversations, which didn't feel possible at all 5 years or so ago. The next thing that we did was we looked at how we, and my first point about not wanting to get arrested was really a very real fear at one time, because I thought, well, we're actually offering accommodation to people, but they've got no recourse to public funds. What does that mean? Like, and at that point, I didn't realize that there was a lawful basis. So therefore I probably was breaking the law. But that's in the past now. So we understood, well, how can you offer people accommodation? And actually councils have a lot of powers, which is very different to having duties. So there's things we have to do as a minimum, there are duties, but you have powers and there are things you can do because you want to. But those things usually cost money. So you also have to work out how you make that work, which is not a conversation that I'm sure you want to hear me talk about today. But we did think about, well, actually, is it better in a purely non-human way? Is it financially better to leave somebody on the streets than it is to offer them somewhere to live? What are the costs of doing that? Because some of my colleagues, albeit that they might care about human beings, their work is finance. So what they're interested in is, well, does it cost less or more? And it obviously costs less to help someone have a good life than to leave them until their life is shit. Sorry. And by shit, what I mean is in hospital, in a care home, living in the most extreme poverty, deprivation, suffering. That doesn't have to happen. And the way those laws are set up is so that we can work so that that doesn't have to happen. under the Care Act, under the Localism Act, for example, continuing healthcare, there's lots of different bits of legislation that enable local authorities to do things if they want to, which isn't as easy as it sounds, but it can happen. And one of the ways that we did that was we also looked at what are the buildings that we've got. Most councils have quite a lot of empty buildings, old care homes, etc., that they might be redeveloping at some point in the future. So we turned them into hostels. Some of them still are, which is great and very strange to be in a care home, which is a hostel, but good. And within those places, we made sure that we made some of those beds rent-free, not NRPF, because that would be illegal, but rent-free. So for all people who might have restricted eligibility in different ways, you can provide different forms of accommodation for them, albeit for short periods of time and or in pending assessments, etc. But you can do that. And we did. We have 27 at the moment rent-free units in Haringey. They're all full and there are still 30 people on the street. So it's not a solution, but at least it's 27 less people who have to sleep outside. And it's 27 people who get to access immigration advice and all of the different services that we've heard about from my colleagues. What are the other things that I wanted to talk to you about? I wrote a list. The other thing we did was understanding our population. So when we say no recourse public funds or restricted eligibility, it doesn't actually really mean anything. Are they Bulgarian people? Are they Windrush people? Are they, all of these people are different and with different needs, different experiences, strengths, etc. If you understand who's living on your streets in your borough, you can also understand who to connect them with, and which organizations exist, what community groups, what friends might they have, the ways that you can help them beyond just providing accommodation. And we were really, really fortunate to build a really good relationship with the Polish and Eastern European community organization in our borough, who did everything we could and a million times more in helping us to establish relationships with people who just thought that the only interaction we wanted to have with them was to tell them to go home. And so sometimes it's about understanding your population and what does that tell you about what you can do and how you can connect people with each other as well, so that they're not as alone. And then the final thing I think I'll probably say is about kind of, I guess there's something about exhausting all of the different options, and that is kind of exhausting. And most of you will know that I don't work frontline anymore, and thank God, because 10 years of it was enough. It's hard work, but it really does make a difference. We worked with people during the pandemic who were like, I'm not supposed to be here. They're going to deport me, etc., etc. And actually, with immigration advice, with accommodation, with some food, with some time that they could sit with someone and work things out, they were absolutely okay to be here. They had a legal basis for being here, but they were so tired that they just couldn't do that work anymore. And lots of those people now have homes and jobs, or are living in supported housing and getting access to the support that they need. And it takes a really long time, as you all know, and a night shelter isn't the solution for someone that's going to be waiting in the immigration system for years. But it can happen and does work and is worth all of that effort, so that the people who have every right to be here, and those who don't know yet whether they do or not, have got the support that they need whilst they're waiting for that to happen. And that's enough from me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And then I'm just going to be introducing the next speakers like as a duo, if that's okay. I'm very, very happy that we have here today Claire Portlock, who is the Home Office Homelessness. She heads up the Home Office Homelessness Team, which was established to support the government manifesto to commitment to end rough sleeping. Claire has been instrumental in making the escalation route work. And I think that, for people that work in the ground, I think that it's things that work that matter. We can have all this conference, we can have all these discussions, but if you have got a client that is in the street, that is desperate, that you want to help, and then you have got ways of sort of getting him out of that misery, but being able to escalate the case, that works. And I think that it has been that pragmatism which has made Claire very popular. And so thank you very much for being here. And then we also have got here Stephen Miller, who is he's the head of the casework team within the chief caseworker unit. So and this is really exciting because it is this team that is going to be taking over the escalation route. I think I've already done it from the first of this month. And I think that this unit was set up in 2018 following the Windrush scandal to support decision-making areas within customer services with the exercise of pragmatic, ethical decision-making. So it's great. I mean, Stephen has come here with a group of colleagues. Can you put your hands up over there? So they come all the way from Liverpool. And then after this session, we are not going to have much time for questions, but we are going to have like a half an hour over coffee for networking. So I sort of encourage you to ask questions to this team that's here especially for you all to speak with. So, and now over to you, Claire.
Thank you. So as Maria said, I'm Claire Portlock and I head up the Home Office Homelessness Team. And essentially we were set up just under 2 years ago. And I do keep saying we're a new team, but I'm not sure how long I'm going to be able to keep that line up. We were set up to support the government's manifesto commitment to end rough sleeping. DLUC are the lead government department in this area, but clearly the whole idea of the conference today is there is a population of rough sleepers that are non-UK nationals, and there's quite a lot of work to do in this space. We're a really small team. So when we were set up about 2 years ago, we were a team of 3. We've increased rapidly to a team of 5 now. We are busy, and I want to just speak to you really, firstly, about the case escalation work and the Rough Sleeper Support Service review that has just recently been conducted, and then just a little bit more about kind of what my team's about and how hopefully we can kind of support this work in this area. So during the Everyone In campaign and kind of Protect and Vaccinate, we committed to conduct a review of the Rough Sleeper Support Service. So also joining me in the room today is Rachel Cherney, who some of you may know, who led the review for the Rough Sleeper Support Service along with DLUC. So we conducted the review of the RSSS. During that time, we identified that there was a gap in what was available to local authorities in the sector, in that, you know, it's no secret nobody had signed up to the RSSS, but there was an opportunity. There was an opportunity while everybody was in accommodation. And I think it's kind of been said on the panel today, hasn't it? Like, let's get people accommodated and then let's take those kind of conversations further of how we can support people. And I think one of the things throughout today has been, we cannot end rough sleeping without partnership working. Now, we made an offer, firstly, to kind of London, around a case escalation service whereby local authorities in the sector can, where there was an outstanding application within the Home Office, they could escalate that to my team and we would kind of look at that case and escalate it to the caseworking department within the Home Office. Now, I think key to this being successful, firstly was, I never had a no team to conduct this piece of work. So very quickly had to recruit some additional member of staff to come in to complete this work. And then partnership working, so like really with Lydia and Michelle, who actually helped us come up with the process and the guidance. And I think that was really key, because I think if it was a Home Office piece of guidance that we put out, we would have got lots of challenge and kind of, you know, lots of mistrust there. But I think that Lydia and Michelle really helped in kind of filling some of those gaps so that process was tight from the start, I think, when it kind of first went out. And I know that, you know, there was lots of kind of feedback from HMAP members around, like, you know, how this process should work. So I think that was really key and a really good kind of foundation for that partnership working. As I said, we wasn't set up to kind of do this piece of work. And then in the end, I think we had just short of 1,700 cases referred to the team. And about 70% of those cases resulted in case resolution for individuals. And kind of the feedback that we have got around has been like that, there's opened up kind of support for individuals. Whilst we conducted this piece of work, we did do a little bit of analysis around kind of what were some of the blockers within the case working teams. Some of that was around the Home Office simply didn't know that that person was vulnerable. So we do have kind of vulnerability prioritisation within our caseworking teams, but they simply didn't know. So we were able to kind of flag that somebody was at risk of homelessness being that vulnerability to make that case be escalated. Kind of some of the other things, again, I think Jake mentioned it in this morning's session, was around kind of some of the barriers in pending prosecutions, what we've always been able to kind of look at as well. So that's been, from kind of our point of view, like really successful. I know that there's lots of other individuals that we need to kind of support in this space, and a little bit of feedback, I think. So the team that were conducting this piece of work have now gone back to their home departments. Not one of them wanted to leave the team because they kind of felt a sense of pride and they were kind of really happy with some of the outcomes that they were getting for individuals. So I just think that that's kind of reflected of like how important this piece of work is and how important this piece of work is to the Home Office and to the Home Office Homelessness Team. So in terms of the rough sleeping strategy commitment, we committed in the strategy to move the rough sleeper support service out of immigration enforcement. Alongside that, so from the 31st of October, the rough sleeper support service as is and the case escalation has moved over to the UKVI Chief Case Working Unit, which Stephen is going to talk about very shortly. It's going to be kind of moved in 2 phases. So that's the first stage, as is, and the case escalation. Phase 2 is going to kind of be looking at, you know, what service improvements we can make to the rough sleeper support service alongside that kind of piece of work and using the feedback from the groups that we held. My team will kind of further support that transition. So before I hand over to Steve, I just wanted to kind of talk about like my team's remit. As I said, we wasn't set up to do that escalation work. There was an opportunity and we seized it. And I'm sure kind of going forward, if there's other opportunities, then we will be more than happy to look at that and seize those opportunities for some quicker wins while we try and sort out some of the kind of longer issues and problems. So really, we have been working, you know, with lots of groups. We're here to kind of look at address some of the kind of practical and policy issues that are affecting kind of the outcomes for rough sleepers. And one of those things that, you know, we're really keen to do is like, we're not the policy owners for anything, you know, and I know there's kind of issues across various types of policies, but what we are willing to do is reach out to those policy teams and bring those in to you guys to have those conversations, to give the feedback and so that they can have a look at what those issues are and see if there's any resolution or any flexibilities or improvements that can be made. So yeah, so really we're not gone. I think that there was some people thought that now we weren't doing the case escalation, we were gone. We're not. My team is still around. So please, like if there's any issues or you want to speak to us in the work that we do, then please just reach out to us and we're more than willing to speak to everybody.
Thank you very much.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. As Maria said, I'm Stephen Miller. I'm the head of the casework team within the Chief Caseworker Unit and also CCU, as we're commonly known. I'm the Chief Caseworker as well for CCU. So there's 3 areas that I'd like to cover in the information that I provide. Firstly, an introduction to the work the Chief Caseworker Unit does, why the team was set up and the work the team undertakes. Then talk about the transition of the rough sleeping support service and the escalation service from immigration enforcement into the Chief Caseworker Unit within our place within UK Visas and Immigration. And then very briefly touch on phase 2, which Claire's already referred to as the planned review of the service and the service improvements. So we'll start with just some information on the work the Chief Caseworker Unit does within UK Visas and Immigration. It was first set up in June 2018, following the Windrush scandal, with a mission to put the customer at the centre of everything that the unit does. So the team was designed to support the whole of UK Visas and Immigration and the caseworking community across the Home Office in the application of discretion and pragmatism, with a clear emphasis on a customer-centric focus, because it's vital to the work the team did at that stage, and that the work the team continues to do now, to have a proper customer-centric focus to the work that we do. From the team's inception, the team supported our mission and remit by providing advice to the caseworking community across the Home Office on individual cases referred into the unit, including on vulnerability and safeguarding issues, and also completing independent reviews of refused cases under the Windrush scheme, and also working on solutions to systemic issues that impact or may impact on effective decision-making, customer service delivery, and blockages to the effectiveness of the operation of the system across migration and borders. So the team has now been ongoing for nearly 4.5 years, and from its inception, the team has supported our mission and remit. The team has evolved over the last 4 years, and while continuing to deliver our mission, our original mission and work streams, we now have a far more wide-ranging remit. The team's customer-centric focus and cross-cutting remit remains, and the work that we do remains intrinsically linked to the delivery of the recommendations within the Windrush Lessons Learned review, and particularly those related to treating customers as people and not cases. A key part of this work is the championing and the support to the caseworking community within the Home Office of the launch and application of the ethical decision-making model. This was launched in November 2021, and CCU, the Chief Caseworker Unit, has delivered awareness sessions across the caseworking community to support the development of understanding and provide advice as part of our role as the escalation route for cases that can't be resolved locally within UK visas and immigration. The team's vision, and I'll just read out directly the team's vision, it sums up nicely exactly how the team takes its work forward, is to empower decision makers to place customer needs at the centre of their decision making, and for decision makers to feel supported by CCU services. We commit to making ethical and discretionary decisions in a compassionate and pragmatic manner, supporting staff to raise concerns and to seek resolution quickly to decision-making obstacles. Our new work streams, including the rough sleeping support service and the escalation service, is at the centre of our current remit to provide customer-focused support in a compassionate manner, applying our cross-cutting and independent remit across the Home Office. Our role as a central unit allows a holistic, cross-cutting impact and influence across the caseworking community. I'll now just spend a few minutes talking about the transition of the rough sleeping support service and the escalation service from immigration enforcement into the Chief Caseworker Unit within UK visas and immigration. So discussions first took place around the Chief Caseworker Unit taking ownership of the rough sleeping support service and the escalation service in early summer 2022. And following the next few weeks after that, the go live date for the transition of the service was agreed with IE's Homelessness Team for the transition to commence on the 31st of October 2022. So we've now had around 2.5 weeks of undertaking the work under the escalation service and also under the rough sleeping support service. We believe that the place for the work within UK visas and immigration is almost a natural home within the Chief Caseworker Unit. It fits directly within our mission to have a clear customer-centric focus and put the customer at the centre of everything that the team does. So the team's cross-cutting role across the caseworking community also enables us to build on the excellent work on the escalation route and the rough sleeping support service that's been undertaken by the Homelessness Team, by further developing the effectiveness of both services, the escalation service and the rough sleeping support service. A key part of the process is that we endeavour to learn from the experiences and successes that the Homelessness Team within immigration enforcement had, to develop and enhance processes, and also to start developing relationships with stakeholders to enable our business readiness, to support our key partners and stakeholders, and enable a smooth transition of the service once it moved over to UK visas and immigration. So the service over the last 2.5 weeks has started successfully, and to date the team has actioned 73 referrals via the escalation service and 83 referrals via the escalation service and 4 via the rough sleeping support service route. So the service has been maintained with no disruption to the service, and the team and myself, so myself and my colleagues Paul and Damien, who are also here today, we'll work with our key partners and stakeholders to ensure the continued smooth running of the service and resolve any issues that may arise. And finally, as Claire's already referred to, in terms of the planned review of the service and service improvements, this is something that we will be commencing over the next few weeks. We'll work closely with our key partners and stakeholders, and both myself and the team will ensure the feedback that has been received as part of the previous reviews and feedback that has been received is fully considered as part of the review that will be completed to enable us to further develop this really important service. And I'd just like to finish by saying that we do believe that the service now has almost a natural home within the Chief Caseworker Unit within UK Visas and Immigration, and we will do our very best to take the service forward and make the necessary improvements, taking into account the feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. So I'm not gonna sort of say much more, but that is just, I mean, there's one thing that is sort of stuck with what John was saying about, like, you know, the compassion, having the compassion, like the partnership of the compassion with those that have the resources. And I think that, you know, for me, it's important that that sort of is reflected today. Yes. And that also that simplicity is the enemy. I really like that, because the lives of our clients are not simple and they shouldn't be considered simple, and we should completely acknowledge that. So brilliant. So we have got time for 5 questions, and we also have got like a little, oh, sorry, 2 questions, 5 minutes. That's right. So I've been multitasking quite a lot today, so I'm not. So that's, who's going to be Laura? Laura, can you take, yes. Thank you very much. Michelle.
Midlands accents of our colleagues in the escalation team from, not that I don't like Scousers, but I'm personally sorry. But I wanted to ask a question about voluntary return or reconnection. The rough sleeping strategy is a good strategy, but it doesn't have a tremendous amount to say about this issue. But one of the things it does talk about is a focus on voluntary return or reconnection for people that might be struggling in the UK. Just an open question to the panel. Do you think it has a role to play? Do you think it should have more of a role to play? It used to be something we talked about a lot more, I think, a few years ago than we do now. So I'm just curious about that part of the strategy, what people think.
Do you want to take
More questions?
No?
Here.
Hi, James from Ramfell. We're one of the immigration providers. And I think it's really good to see the work that's done on the escalation, and a good example of some collaboration and what we can achieve. And I think in terms of John welcoming some challenges, I think for DLUHC to think about the earlier point was mentioned is it's great that this funding is coming from DLUHC, but we've really got one hand kind of tied behind our back. And I know Home Office colleagues may also feel that way as well. Is in terms of those people with long residence applications. So we have people who've been here for 20 years and they may have difficulty evidencing that, but we've also got people here for 17, 18, 19 years who, when we do a subject access request and get the Home Office records, we can see that this person was detained. They were released because they couldn't be documented. And then they were found by enforcement again. They were looked at for detention, but they weren't detained because they couldn't be documented. And so for quite a few clients like these, they're going to be years in this situation where really the RSI services that we're providing, which are great, won't be able to help those people. And they're a significant number. In one borough where we're having a conversation with DLUHC and Home Office soon, we tied up some numbers for one borough, and half of them could make 20 years in this category. And half of them were in that 17, 18, 19 years where it's very unlikely they're going to be deported. It's unlikely they're going to take up voluntary return, but it's very likely that they're going to sleep rough for that time. And I know in Redbridge, they're actually fighting to keep them in accommodation and are not necessarily going to be allowed to do so, because for them it's easier and less expensive than all the emergency services and everything that often goes into. So just with your point, John, of that kind of scene in your local park, and just the feeling that a lot of services feel where they're stuck and they can't go anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire, are we gonna take another room?
Any more questions
Yeah.
from the floor?
I think,
I could do one.
okay, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really struck by the situation in Redbridge and in Ealing, which I would say are similar in their complexity. And there's quite a difference, I think, in that situation you outlined there from a lot of the general kind of homelessness, especially the stuff I was referring to earlier. And I think the specificness is really important. I'm really impressed, for example, with Hope for Southall Street Homeless. No, John's here. Give us a wave, John. If speak to John afterwards, because their approach over in Ealing with probably the most complex cohort of this group of people, I think it's really interesting. And as a local grassroots organization, the connections they've got back in the Punjab, where a lot of this cohort come from, is a real example of innovative, compassionate work, where they're not just a ticket home, but a real connection with dealing with the cultural issues and all of those barriers. So I do think it's a really important part of exhausting all options, the reconnections, but it needs, again, real honesty about what works and what works long term, rather than just gets people out the way. And I think also just being really specific about, there's a small number of highly complex situations, and then a more broader situation where there's more similarities, I think, and less complexity. But yeah, I think it's an important area.
Thank you. So I think on the reconnections area, Michelle, and voluntary returns. So the Home Office has a voluntary returns package. And I think the reason that voluntary returns was kind of included in the strategy was we hear quite a lot of feedback from the sector around this. Lots of people that want to voluntary return but aren't eligible for Home Office support, or for various reasons, won't sign up to voluntary returns, or even kind of buy support by the local authority to voluntary return. So I think we've got a lot of work to do in this area, Michelle. We've had some initial conversations, and unsurprisingly, our first step is going to be some workshops, which you should hear from us soon. And we're working with Jake's team in DLUC to kind of pull those together to try and unpick kind of some of the issues, because I don't think that as the Home Office or as kind of government that we know what the issues are and what we need to do to resolve some of these issues. So we will be kind of running some very similar workshops that we have before with kind of homelessness sector, local authorities, to get that feedback. But yeah, if there's something that we can do in this space to support people, then we will. Just to kind of touch on the point around long residency, there are conversations kind of ongoing with kind of the policy leads, especially, we've talked about Redbridge in this space, but and the only thing that I can kind of say is, like, if you're kind of encountering these difficulties, then please do raise these with us, and we will certainly kind of have a look and see what we can do to support and bring the right policy teams in that may be able to support in these areas.
So yeah, on voluntary return, I think that's definitely a conversation that it would be great if we can go back to like evidence-based. So we know that in the past there was a very good service that did a lot of that, having immigration advice as the first thing and a rights-based approach, etc. That's really important with these. And it's about recognizing that specifically this group is likely to have a lot of needs in terms of support, and what the Home Office can realistically do, and what do they have to kind of commission out, because they're not going to be able to do. And what's happening very often is that people are not getting that support, and either someone else has to pick up that type of work, or they're just not being supported at all. And then the case is closed by the Home Office. The person still wants to return, but nobody's helping them to do that. So that also happens. So there is about those complex cases, but it's important that it's really people that do want to return, and that they are aware of all of the options, etc. And I think in some of the cases, for example, James was talking about, because of the time of the length of time the person has been in the country, there is that big element, and that's why the 20 years is there, because it reflects kind of human rights and non-residents, etc. So looking at that, it's also really important. I did make a note to invite the chief case working unit to the meeting we're having next week, Ranfell, on long residence, because I thought some of the things you were saying around looking more at the policy and, making those kind of pragmatic decisions, it's what would be great for cases like that, where, everything has been tried, and exhaustional options also includes the Home Office exhaustional options. So yeah, say that. Thanks.
Okay. So I think that we ate a little bit into our networking sort of slot, but that's fine because it's been very interesting discussions and very interesting questions. Are we gonna do the Slido?
No, I think we need to stop now.
Okay.
You need to tell people where they.
Yes. So that's that. So basically, we are now having a networking session, which was about meeting